So we're back with part 2 of lesson 3. We've got built our simple loop file. So that code has been pushed up to Git for you now. A couple other quick items that I want to point out. I'm not going to read through the whole things, but I just want to go through quickly. They're in the lesson 3 folder. This article is worth reading, particularly in light of most of you are in our Project Studio class on Monday, and we had the conversation yesterday about your team trying to figure out what technology stack is appropriate for the project you guys are going to be building for the Center for Social Innovation here at the college. So this article is a couple years old, but it gives a pretty good description of where Node fits in kind of the web application landscape and what kind of projects Node is a particularly good fit for, as well as which kind of projects you might choose a different type of framework, like a LAMP stack or an ASP.NET solution. And as they pointed out in bold, it's a platform that fills a particular kind of need. So for example, if you're doing a lot of intensive calculation, Node probably isn't a good fit for that. It's designed for doing a lot of simultaneous, simple transactions, not for doing things that are overly complex. So to explain about how this works with non-blocking, some of the stuff we've already looked at over the last couple of lessons. Good description of NPM. We're actually going to use this package today, Connect. And they give out some specific examples of where Node is a good fit. So something like real-time chat. I know somebody mentioned socket.io. So Rick mentioned socket.io. So Socket is a common package for doing real-time chat. So I would suggest take a bit of time and give this a read over. It also works really well as an API. So there's some different scenarios here of where Node is good, as well as some description down at the bottom of where you might want to. So it used to be we didn't use Node with relational databases. That's changed over the last few years. Talking about using heavy processing, so doing data analytics, sophisticated reporting. Node's probably not the right solution for that. But I would suggest in your Project Studio teams, have a look at this article. It's going to help you make an informed decision about what kind of tools you want to use for that project. So that link is here in lesson 3. The other one that I've put up, this is kind of an unofficial document. It's a few years old now. Yeah, it hasn't been updated for a little while. So this is a coding style guide. So there's different ways we can write our Node code, but this guide, this developer put together a series of recommended best practices, that this is typically how Node developers are formatting their code in some kind of standard way. So these are not necessarily rules, but they're guidelines. So guidelines for things, I'll just kind of touch on some of the important things. So if you're going to indent, use 2 spaces. And swear an oath, do not mix tabs and spaces. It recommends using semicolons, although that is sort of changing a bit, as JavaScript is now no longer requiring it. Recommend using single quotes around strings rather than double quotes, even though both will work and give us the same result. This is the recommended style. Also, in terms of our curly braces, they recommend we open curly braces on the same line as our statement rather than moving them down here. This would be ASP.NET style. Opening and closing braces are each on their own line. In JavaScript, this is the common style. They also recommend naming conventions, so the variables, properties, and method names. Typically, we're going to use camel case, so I'm going to use that same convention. If we're creating class objects, which we will later in the semester, when we get into using MVC structure for our models will use Pascal case typically. So they'll start with an uppercase character. And if we have constants, then typically those are represented by all capital letters. So this is just a good guide. Again, where he says right and wrong doesn't mean one will work and one won't. The right is the recommended style of what the code would look like. So you don't have to follow this, but I'm going to recommend you do. It will typically follow, this guide typically follows most of the code samples you're going to see, most of the tutorials, and that way our code in class will kind of be consistent. So this is just up here. It's this item here, the node style guide. Really just a set of best practices and common standards. Okay. I'm just going to update this item as well as I did with our earlier one. So I want to just sort of walk through what we want to look at. I guess we looked at the style guide already. I want to look at routing. So right now, for example, with our node application, I'll just start the server again. Notice it runs, our loop file runs at localhost 3000. What will happen if I try calling this URL? So instead of calling my route, I call a specific route, specific path. There's a few things that could happen. Our file could load, we could get a blank screen, we could get a 404 error. What do you think is the likely result if we call this URL? 404. What about now? Well, at run, we get 404. So no matter what URL we call, whenever we make a request to localhost 3000, it just does the same thing every time. This code runs continually. And the reason is this library isn't smart enough to manually try to interpret individual URL paths. It just does the same thing every time. It ignores any specific URL. All requests just go here and this code runs every time. So what we want to do is we're going to use a new NPM package called Connect. Maybe somebody wants to add it to our NPM spreadsheet, so we've got it. So Connect, it kind of works with the web server that comes with that HTTP module we're using to run our server. Okay? But it allows us to extend the functionality, because all HTTP does is basically let us run a server. So Connect is like middleware. It sits on top of the HTTP library and gives it extra functionality we can use. So for example, we can start to read different paths. So in our application, we don't want all of these URLs to do the same thing. We want to have 3 different responses depending on which URL gets called. So we're going to use Connect so we can interpret the specific path within our website and then send some kind of different response depending on what URL the user's asked for. So Connect is going to allow us to do this. So it'll allow us to perform logic and return a response. So it uses this object called the dispatcher. And the job of the dispatcher is to read the URL request and then decide what to do with it. As we said, For example, in ASP.NET, that part happens automatically. The dispatcher looks at the URL, it knows which controller to call, and then what method inside the controller. Connect will handle this stuff for us, but we have to set up all the rules and paths manually. It's not automatic like it is in ASP.NET. So we're going to try a really simple example. This is basically the equivalent. Instead of using the HTTP library and the create server method, the connect version is a little shorter. We need to install it and link to it. We create an instance of our connect object, and then we just call listen on 3000. This will do the same thing, but with less code than our HTTP create server.listen does, but they're equivalent. The other difference is when we use connect, we can then start to call different URLs in our site and send different responses back. So our first step is to install Connect into our Lesson 3 project. We don't need to install it globally. We're only using it for this project. So I'm going to hit Control-C to stop my server because NodeMon is still running my server. I can't do anything in my command window until I stop the server. So I'm going to say, yes, terminate my server. And now I get a blinking cursor. And I've used the terminal in WebStorm. You can use your Windows or Mac terminal or command window if you prefer. So how would I install the module called Connect? What command do we need to run to install it? npm I connect. So the I is short for install. So let's install that module. So when we install Connect, we get a bunch of other dependencies. How many? Well, we can jump over to npm and look. So it's really widely used. Over 2,000 other packages require Connect, and it installs 4 dependencies along with it. Super widely used, 3 million downloads a week. We'll deal with this a little bit after. It tells us there's some vulnerabilities. We'll maybe come back to this later. We'll try and get Connect working, and if we have time, we'll deal with this little security warning. So I'm going to make a new file. Let's make a new JavaScript file. And again, we'll call this server.js. You don't have to give it the extension. If I say new JavaScript file, my WebStorm editor will automatically assign the .js extension. So instead of requiring the HTTP library and calling create server, we're going to use Connect instead to start our server and listen on port 3000. So we're going to use that Connect library to create a new Connect object. Because this object can run its own web server. Then we want to start the web server. Again, we can define a port, but we may as well stay with 3000. So all we have to do, we don't need to create a server call. We just say our connect object can start, and it can listen for events on port 3000. This last step is optional. We don't really require it. But this way it'll print a message in my terminal when the server starts, saying that it's running on port 3000. So this is a little bit simpler than using the HTTP library. It does the same thing. We've written less code. Whenever we can write less code, that's good because there's fewer chances. The more code we write, the greater the chance of us making a syntax error or spelling mistake somewhere in it. So if we wanted to try this now, how could we try this? What command would I need to run in my terminal to run this file and see if how our Connect server works? So we could do node, or if I wanted to restart, I could use nodemon. Node would work. So I'll run my command nodemon server, restart the server, watching for changes, but now it will run this file instead of our loop file. So nodemon starts. My terminal prints a message that we've got from line 11 or console.log. And now if we go to localhost 3000, we have this. So our server's actually running. We didn't get a server not found error. The server is running. This is actually the expected behavior. What does this message mean? Sorry? Right, we haven't said, so the default HTTP method is always get. So I'm making an HTTP request by loading this URL in the browser, but we haven't told the Connect server what to do when a request comes in here. So we manually have to handle this request. So in order to deal with this cannot get, we're going to need to set up some kind of response handler that gets called. So I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to set it equal to an anonymous function. And we're going to have, with our HTTP create server, we had, as I think Blair said earlier, we had two parameters, right? We had a request and we had a response. We're going to have three parameters when we're working with Connect, and they're going to be similar. Before I write the code, I'll show you what they look like. So here was the response we expected to get. That's what we did get. So Connect actually has three arguments. Instead of using the full word request, it uses this shorthand REQ for the request, RES for the response. And then we have this optional third parameter called next. We don't use next very much, but we'll look at what it does in a minute. In effect, next lets us send a response back to the browser, but then call another function or do something else, like maybe write to an error log or send an email after we've already sent a response back to the browser. So we're going to use these same three connect parameters: request, response, and next. I'll just make a comment here about what these parameters are. So in here, we'll write a header, 200. And we're going to response. So fairly similar code to what we did with the HTTP library. We're setting an OK response. We're printing a message back and ending the response. Actually, I know I'm misthinking it, so we'll try it anyway. Let's wrap it in HTML tags and see if they get rendered. So we've written this function. It never actually gets called. So we're first going to map all requests to be handled. So we have this use method that comes with connect. So anytime a request comes in, send it to this method where we're going to give the user an OK response, print a hello world H1, and end. So let's try this. Go back to your browser and refresh localhost 3000. What happens in this case? What do you get in the browser? You get an H1 with the hello world message. Okay. What happens if you add a slash and some URL name on the end of it? Does it still run this method again, or do you get a not found error? Still works no matter what we put in the URL. Okay, so I'll refresh. We get our great big hello world. So the way our code is written with this app.use, what this means is we don't care what the URL actually looks like. Every request is handled by this same method. So this isn't exactly going to work for a real website. For an actual website, we need to have different URLs and we need different things to happen at each one. Right now, all three of these, they're all going to just call hello world no matter what we do. So we want to change this. Instead of mapping all requests here, We want to do this instead. That if the user requests the URL localhost 3000/hello, then it should go here. If they ask for any other URL, we don't want to give them hello world. So in this case, we're going to modify this. So if we get a request at this path, it'll then call this method and print hello world. So now at my root file, we now get this error again because we haven't given any instruction what response should come back. How do we handle the response if there's no URL on the end? What would I do to see my hello world response? If we make a request directly here, it now calls our hello world function. So we're manually mapping an individual URL path to a specific function to handle that request. So right now, this is the only path we've mapped. Any other path we put in will have a cannot get error instead. So here's what I want you to try next. I want you to make a goodbye world function that prints the message goodbye world. And that response should get sent from the URL localhost 3000/goodbye. You're going to need a new function, new method to handle it and send that response. And you're going to need to map the path, like we've mapped the hello path. So do the same thing, and then we should have two working URLs in our site. Right now we have one. Go ahead and try to do the goodbye method and path on your own. Installing, so that's good. So now try node 1. Node 1, you have to do npm I node 1 -g. That's global install. So you can run it as a folder, or without the -g, install the package just in that one folder, in that one project. So a development tool like NodeMon, it's not specific to one project, we're just using it for general development. So it makes sense to install it globally. that you can run into anywhere. Something like Connect, you don't want to install globally. We're only using it in this project. So we're going to let you install globally specific to this one project. Okay, so let's reinstall NodeMon global. So npm. Yep. npm space I space NodeMon space -G. But did you do it -G globally? That's why. So whatever folder you were in previously, have NodeMon in that folder, but you can't use it in this. So -G will install it globally, so then you can run any folder with NodeMon. Okay. Okay, Manu, yours is working. Can you tell us how you did it? And I'll add your code. Okay, so I'll create a goodbye world function. As you said, same 3 parameters. And Manu, what's the first thing I should do in here? Yep. Right ahead. Yep, we'll do it right. Okay, and then how do we get this to get executed? Okay, so what path should I use? Bye, okay, or goodbye, either one. And then how do I call that method at this path? Right, then we just reference our goodbye world variable on line 15. So when a request comes into this URL, it will call this variable, which we've assigned to this anonymous function. I'll save that. And then if we go back to our browser and try localhost 3000/goodbye, we should get a goodbye world message coming back. So then we've mapped 2 URLs. So hello still runs. And now my goodbye path works as well. Anything else, we're still going to have our cannot get, because we've only provided 2 valid paths. So we're going to write one more method. So we're going to say these are the only 2 valid paths. If our user requests any other path besides hello or goodbye, we don't want to give them this message. We want to give them a proper not found. So all other URLs should return a not found response. So let's create one more variable which we assign to an anonymous function. What should we put in here? So we say we basically have a 2-page website. Hello is valid, goodbye is valid, and that's it. Right, so in this case, let's return a 404 response. So we're returning HTTP status code 404 not found. So if we call any URL other than our hello or goodbye and we look in our browser console, we're going to see a 404 response instead of a 200 response. What should we say in our response in the browser? What should it say? Sure. And then we'll end the response. So what could we do to send all other URL paths to our 404 handler? We could. We don't. It's actually even simpler than that. So this path is mapped here. This path is mapped here. Kevin? Close. We actually did it. Remember when we first built this page, the first one we built, no matter what URL we went to, it displayed hello world every time. Right, so all other paths, so we actually don't need any path at all. So the hello URL calls the hello function, the goodbye URL calls the goodbye function, and this is like our fallback or our default. So this is our default request handler for any other URL paths besides /hello and /goodbye. So first it will check for hello. If it finds it, it calls that function. Then it checks for the path goodbye. If it finds that, it calls that function. And this is our fallback. If we didn't hit hello and we didn't hit goodbye, we're going to send a not found response instead. So this would get rid of our cannot get error. Let's try this. Hello works. So now we're handling the two URLs we want, and then we have this default handler in case we get any paths that we're not sending a specific response to. Now maybe we should make one more, because the root, right now if we go to the root, we just go to localhost 3000, what do we get? Yeah, we get a not found error in the root, which probably is a bit nonsensical. So let's make one more path. We'll send a 200 response. And we'll say that this is the Connect homepage. So if we go to localhost 3000 with no specific URL, it will show our index or homepage. So what should we do in terms of mapping the URL and where should we put it? Sure. So we'll map it to the path, just a slash with nothing after it. So where should we put that? Okay, let's try that. So if we get a request in the root path, so just a slash, we'll call our index method. So we've now got 3 permitted URLs, the root, hello, and goodbye. Everything else returns 404. So let's give this a try. So we go to the root. That's good. That's not so good. That's not so good either. So now we've changed that all our responses are every request is being routed to the home page only. How come? Because all of these paths start with a slash. So as soon as connect encounters a slash, it says, oh, there's a slash, call the index method. So what would we have to do to fix this? We could. There's maybe a simpler fix. Sorry, Linda? Okay. Let's try it after goodbye. So we're actually going to check for these 2 roots first. So we'll move it down here. And we'll try going through our sequence of URLs again. Right. So the order that we're checking these paths, it matters. Now hello works simply by putting the root path at the bottom. So hello works again. Goodbye works again. And if we try some other URL, so we're almost there. But now trying anything else, it still loads the home page instead of our not found. So we have to make one last adjustment to fix this. How would you change it? Sorry? Okay. Let's try that. What happens if we put not found up at the top? Whoops, made a mess of that. Okay, let's try this. If we do not found, hello, goodbye, and then the home page. Okay, not found works. Hello gives us not found. Goodbye gives us not found. Root gives us not found. Okay. Our code is correct. Again, still not quite in the order we need it to be in. So what order should these go in? Well, when we had index first before, everything went to the home page. So index, we realized hello and goodbye didn't work unless index was below them. So we had this before. So when we had it like this, these 3 worked, but not found never loaded. That is the solution. So that's our last. Index has to go at the bottom. So this must be last, or else it overrides all other paths. So now this should be in the correct order. First check for hello, then check for goodbye. So now we try our home page. Wait a minute. That didn't work. Okay. So our index has to be here. I don't actually think we can use both of these together. We can't both run because any path that starts with a slash is going to go to the index, which means this is never going to run. We'll just take that out for now. So our not found handler, yeah. We'll have to handle that some other way.
We can use
Okay, how would you want to do that? Well, one way of doing it, I guess, would be in here, if we can inspect the URL. I think, Arya, this is what you were suggesting earlier for not found. Potentially, we could inspect the path of the request object. And if it's anything other than a slash, we could then send a 404 response instead. Let's see from the Connect documentation if it allows us to check. It would be in here somewhere. We'd have to look at the docs for, let's see, there's request.url. Okay, let's try that for a minute. If we print it to the console, we can inspect this value. And potentially we can say if this is anything other than a slash, so show a 404. Okay. So it shows slash something else, and if I go to my index, it's just a slash. So we could write a little bit of logic in here. So we could say if the user's actually gone to the root, localhost 3000, send an OK and print our homepage message. Otherwise, so we will check. Did they go to the root or did they call some other URL that doesn't exist in our site? Our other option would be call a not found function, I guess. That would work too. So home works. Hello works. Goodbye. So now our index is checking if they're actually in the root or something else. So that's one way of doing it. I guess the other way of doing it would be we could call our not found function. These should be equivalent. We've already written the not found method here. We'll see if this works this way. It doesn't want us to do that. Okay. So I'll just disable that function. We'll do it in here. So now we basically have a 3-page website. We have 3 allowed URLs, root, hello, and goodbye, and all other URL requests will return a 404 response. So Connect handles all of these paths for us, all the paths and all the routing. Root. In this case, so we'll allow requests that are root, but we're not going to allow any other requests. Only the root path, hello, and goodbye. Those are the only ones that are allowing. That we're accepting. 404 gets returned by everything else. Okay, I know I've gone over time, but we're actually just about done. That's all the code we're going to do for today. So the important thing to takeaways here are using Connect is preferable to using the HTTP module with create server that we've used so far. This is shorter and simpler. It's got 3 parameters, the request, response, and next. We didn't use next today, but we'll use it a little bit in the future. We manually have to map individual URL paths to functions, and the order we map them in, it matters. If we put index first, hello and goodbye never execute, because the home page will run every time in this case. The last thing I just wanted to do, you notice when we installed Connect, we actually got some NPM errors. And it told us if we did an NPM audit, okay, we'll do this next week. We'll just leave it at that. Are there any questions about our little Connect, one-page Connect website? Anything here we should review again? Michelle? We're using the if-else inside here because any request that's not hello or goodbye comes inside this method. So we want to know the difference between this URL, right? So this URL here just start my server again. So at this URL, I should get this response. But if I go to my home page, so nothing after localhost 3000, I should get this. So both of these URLs are being handled by this method. So any request that's not hello and not goodbye is sent here. So I'm checking if they just asked for the root, I want to show them the home page. But if they put anything else on the end of the URL, I want to give them this response instead. So that's our decision. Is it the home page they want, or did they put in some URL that doesn't exist? And if it's some URL that doesn't exist, we want to give them 404. If there's nothing at the end of it, then they just give them the home page. Okay, does that help? Okay. Are there any other questions about what we've done in here today? Okay, I'm going to upload everything. So your lab is due on Friday. So you don't need Connect for your lab. It's just basic JavaScript practice for you. Next week's class is really important because next week we are going to look at Express. We'll have another lab using Express. And Express is similar to Connect. In fact, under the hood, Express uses Connect. So we're going to use Express to start the web server and map our URL requests. So doing it with Connect is a little simpler for today. Now you see how it works, going to be similar next week. And Express has a tool called the Express Generator you may want to read about. The Express Generator will basically build a node MVC structure for us and already include a bunch of libraries. So much like with Visual Studio, we have a working site right away when we use the Express Generator. And then we start to customize it. And we'll use that the rest of the semester. Okay. So your labs are due on Friday. Okay, that's all for today. Have a good week. See you on Monday.